For decades, cardiovascular training completed at dawn has been prescribed as the absolute gold standard for human health. The foundational clinical consensus is clear. Regular aerobic exercise effectively lowers resting blood pressure. Because of this, both medical professionals and patients have overwhelmingly favored scheduling these exercise protocols in the morning hours, treating it as the optimal start to a healthy day. But blood pressure is a highly dynamic physiological metric. This 24-hour diurnal curve shows how it constantly shifts, experiencing a sharp upward rise upon waking, plateauing during the day, and taking a distinct downward dip in the evening. The traditional intervention model blindly places the physical stress of exercise squarely on this curve, striking directly at the morning peak. This approach entirely ignores the body's internal clock. A comprehensive new meta-analysis reveals a significant discrepancy in clinical outcomes purely based on the time of day the exercise is performed. This introduces the concept of chronotherapy, the precise, strategic timing of physiological interventions to maximize their biological impact. The data shows that evening exercise protocols yield a mathematically superior hypotensive response compared to standard morning routines. Treating exercise as a chronotherapeutic tool requires us to weigh the timing of the intervention as heavily as the physical exertion itself. To understand this, we have to ask a precise analytical question. How much clinical impact does altering the specific time of intervention have on the magnitude of a patient's blood pressure drop? We can measure this by looking at a recent rigorous meta-analysis, aggregating data from over 20 distinct randomized controlled trials into 2 distinct clusters: morning intervention and evening intervention. Capturing an adult sample size spanning ages 25 to 65, these clusters resolve into a split bar chart. The primary outcome reveals a clear gap in efficacy, with the evening bar dropping significantly lower. Evening and early night protocols achieved an additional mean reduction in systolic blood pressure of 5 millimeters of mercury over morning routines. Concurrently, there was a simultaneous additional reduction of 3 millimeters of mercury in diastolic pressure. We need to translate these specific metric drops into real-world clinical significance. In cardiovascular medicine, a consistent 5 millimeter modulation is a highly meaningful reduction, directly correlating to lower long-term vascular risk. This data invalidates the automatic preference for morning cardio, forcing an investigation into the physiological machinery that drives this profound evening drop. The biological mechanism driving these results comes down to circadian hemodynamics. The human biological clock dictates a natural downregulation of vascular resistance as the day progresses into the evening hours. Returning to our 24-hour diurnal curve, we can model the natural blood pressure drop that temporarily follows any bout of aerobic exertion, overlaid here in the morning phase. Morning exercise forces the pressure drop to fight upstream against the innate morning vascular surge. Contrast this with the evening model. Shifted later, the waveform aligns with the natural downward circadian slope, merging into a deeply amplified valley. This is physiological synergy. Evening exercise aligns the acute post-workout pressure drop directly with the innate circadian dip. This alignment creates a compounded, highly efficient reduction in overall vascular resistance. The evening protocol leverages the body's existing biological momentum, rather than attempting to override an upward morning trend. Optimal physiological outcomes require harmonizing acute physical stressors with the body's internal clock. Placing exercise later in the day immediately invites a common physiological concern: sleep disruption. This timeline from 1800 to midnight maps out the specific mechanism of sleep disruption: excessive excitation of the sympathetic nervous system. A late-night exercise protocol triggers a sharp upward spike in arousal that physically collides with the body's required sleep architecture. Late-night exertion maintains this arousal, actively hindering sleep onset. But observe the optimal protocol. Shifted to the early evening, the arousal spikes, but completely flattens to baseline well before the sleep phase. Early evening interventions allow ample time for the sympathetic arousal phase to fully clear the nervous system. Placing exercise in this early evening sweet spot successfully captures the maximum hypotensive benefits while leaving delicate sleep architecture perfectly intact. Moving from theoretical physiological models to concrete daily routines requires actionable scheduling. The first highly effective temporal window opens immediately following the workday. Transitioning directly to activities like cycling offloads psychological stress while initiating the vascular drop. The second highly accessible window is the post-dinner walk. Walking after a meal provides a dual physiological benefit, mechanically aiding digestion while simultaneously triggering the evening hypotensive response. This three-tiered clinical flowchart outlines how to formalize these strategies into a clear hierarchy of importance. Any lifestyle medicine prescription must address the ultimate pragmatic constraint, long-term patient adherence. We must account for the reality of schedule constraints and ask what happens if a patient simply cannot exercise in the evening. The absolute non-negotiable baseline of cardiovascular health is securing total weekly training volume. That means a strict minimum requirement of 150 minutes of moderate-intensity aerobic work per week, regardless of when it occurs. A morning routine completed consistently is infinitely superior to a perfectly timed evening routine that is never executed. While evening chronotherapy represents the physiological optimum for reducing blood pressure, ironclad adherence to weekly training volume remains the inescapable foundation of cardiovascular health.